My name is Darrell Steele, and I'm from Lawton, Oklahoma, born and raised there. And I have a dad, mom that raised me there, and my sisters and brothers. I have a brother and two sisters. We had a very strong net family. And around the age of about, I'd say about 22, decided that I was going to move out here after playing college football and not quite making it to the pros like I had anticipated. It didn't happen. And, I was a young man, age of 22, was able to move out on my own and decided to come to Atlanta and to get in the broadcast field. And after arriving here in Atlanta, getting a chance to experience this, what they call 11 to 1, 11 women to one man. And I tried to get all of that. And I experienced a lot in growing up here and being involved in the nightlife and working in radio and television and working at different radio stations, some of the top radio stations here in Atlanta. Really, as a young man, having a real exciting life, and just kind of found that being able to be out here, not being under the supervision of family and mother at 22 years old, really found myself making decisions that were very high-risk decisions, if you would, in regards to things that growing up, I would never, drugs and alcohol was never even an option. Athletic, working out, sports, didn't believe in it, and came out here and I changed my friends. I kind of got away from my roots of, the spiritual component that I was raised in. And that's when I really started to see my life kind of go through this whirlwind of change. And it was this downward kind of spiral that was, took me away from who I think my family put a lot into me. And it didn't happen immediately. It was a slow process. It was hanging out. It was compromising my morals and values. And before you know it, man, you're out every night, you're drinking, getting up late, not as productive as you need to be, spending money, and your people and peers change. And it's interesting because I found that those people were doing things that I didn't have any desire as a young kid growing up, because I didn't have any problems with juvenile or with police or with any law enforcement. Not that I had a perfect life, but I didn't have any problems with them. But I found myself with a whole different population of people. And these people were using drugs and alcohol. And it's so interesting. I can remember the first time, the very first day that I snorted cocaine. I can remember the place, the apartment in the park, back the cold, the day, the time it was. And that decision was my first worst decision. And my whole life began to change at that point. Yeah. And because I liked it. And when I started liking it, it began to, and I didn't understand then like I do now, having all of this education in drugs and substance abuse, that it didn't take much for that to creep into your life and everything else is on hold. And it started then that I started making bad decisions to support the addiction. And as I began to support the addiction with money and taking money and doing certain things and compromising my work as a manager. I've been managers for companies, working pest control, Valley Spas, was in radio and television. And when I found it, that it caused me to start making bad decisions. Those bad decisions, eventually, they were it wasn't like it just happened all of a sudden. It was, you got in trouble for theft by taking, or you may have got stopped and had a paraphernalia and just little things. And I believe that through the whole process that there was always that small, still voice that was speaking to me. But because I had closed off all of that for the desire to want to continue to support that addiction, it's amazing. Sometimes I sit back and I think, I'm like, God, I made at Orkin Pascal, I was set to make $125,000, $124,000 as a manager. And the unfortunate thing is that through that whole process, it wasn't even about the money of making money. It was the fact that I was trying to deal with an addiction that I didn't understand. I didn't understand why I was thirsting for that drug and alcohol. And eventually, it led me to working with a company that I had a very promising career with. I was with Orkin Pest Control. And it ended up causing me to make bad decisions. And it was that where I first got my first encounter with law enforcement. And over checks that as a manager I was supposed to be putting up, and begin to have those checks made out to me. It was just bad decisions after one. And it gave me a smack on the hand. And that wasn't really enough for me, because the addiction was still there. And I didn't know. I just knew that I needed to feed it because it was telling me that I needed it. And in those days, we didn't have a whole lot. Wasn't like as much talk about treatment and getting into treatment. It was like, boy, you work out, you're supposed to just go say no. But folks didn't understand the effect of the brain and what it has affected and how it's affected our brain and in making our decisions because of the desire for the dopamine of the brain and all that scientific stuff. But it's real. And it just continuously, progressively got worse, where the drugs and the people come, and then it goes from cocaine and then it's pills and then it's crack and it's whatever you can get in your system when you're out there like that for that craving, just to meet that, not knowing that there was a deeper issue that was going on in the inside of me than just really that, and didn't understand that. But I ended up one night being out with a kid, and he was going into this place to rob it. And I'm sitting in the truck, and he comes out and jumps in the truck. We drive off, and we both get arrested. And they tell me that I'm being arrested for an armed robbery, and I'm like, oh my God. And that was a pivotal moment in my life that scared me crazy, And, I was able to get through that whole piece and not get that charge. But, I was so angry, still not understanding that. And I felt good because I had overcome it. But the people were still there. I didn't change the whole process of my life. There was areas that I just wanted to change. Like I wanted to change not using anymore. But I didn't change the people that were around me. And my thinking was still, and behavior hadn't changed. I was clean and sober, but I had the same behavior. So the behavior then told me, you know what, Darrell, you're the man. You need to be selling dope to these folks now. Because they want it, and they're weak. So I found myself, I began to sell dope and, wasn't gonna use no more. And I just began to sell. And life was still. I was still functioning. I was running a law firm and doing some things for a law firm, and I was still able to use all the ability that I had accumulated. I think that's important too, because you realize that a lot of the stuff, times we think we learn along life's journey, that you lose it. But you never really lose that stuff. You keep it. And so all of the ability, the education, all that, it always followed me. Sometimes it was a hindrance worse than it was, because it allowed me to be able to still manipulate. I understood the gift of manipulate. I had the gift of gab and manipulation. And that whole component, after getting caught up with the this whole piece of selling drugs, took me to a whole nother level of life. And it was at that point I started introducing. I met my wife, and then I started with a family. And before I know it, I'm sitting in these big houses and all these cars and life. I'm like, oh my God, how life can just shift. And really deep down inside, I felt good because I'm like, man, I'm ready to balance this. Until one day the police shows up at your door and says, hey man, and I got 18 grams of cocaine and all these and everything goes away. Everything goes away. And that's been almost 10 years ago now, that when I lost it all. And 2 little boys, an 8 and a 9-year-old, and a wife that had to be without me for 18 months while I was incarcerated. And it was at that moment that I made that decision, man, sitting down in the Georgia State Prison, that I'm done and I'm through with that. And when God gave me an opportunity to make a decision to do something, I said, you don't have to worry about me ever going back to that foolishness. And I came home and I was able to pull together my family and my wife and my children, and in the midst of all of this, to connect with the right people, my people changed, and I started attending and going to meetings and getting me back together. I had a lot of support while I was incarcerated. I met the right people. I talked to the right people. I didn't get caught up in a lot of the foolishness that goes on in the inside. I was helping guys with their GED and trying to help guys to realize that this doesn't have to be the end. This can be the beginning of a change. And that's really what I experienced, that even that time that, I met people that had life and had a lot of time, and they were so unfortunate to not maybe be able to get out, but you know what? There's still hope. And in prison, a day could vary. It varied depending upon who the officer was that was on shift. If the officer knew that you carried yourself with a different character, they know who's the troublemakers. They know who's doing certain things. But if you're in there and you have the right demeanor and attitude about where you are, you can bypass so much of the stuff that's going on that's gang-related, drug-related, homosexuality that goes on in there, because the officers know. Granted, if you want to be a part of the robbing crew, the drug crew, or gang-related activities, it's all there. It is a world within itself. It has its own governing rules. The officers just oversee from shift to shift. But one thing that the officers do bring to the table is that they know who inside of there, in a lot of cases, that they can, I guess, respond with and communicate with, and they won't mess with you. They really don't. The most difficult part is being disconnected from your family, especially for those that have had a nucleus of family. The hardest times are the holidays and birthdays, being disconnected from family, and not having or being able to contact them when you want to. Is very difficult. It's very difficult being disconnected. Probably the worst day is when you realize that as an older person, that your accomplishments of what you've done in life, and to have someone that is younger than you, that has the authority over you, learning how to submit to that process and just take it and go with the flow. It's sometimes difficult in dealing with that, especially when you know in your heart that you didn't have to be here. You made bad decisions. Always on a day-to-day basis wanting to beat up on yourself instead of learning to accept your circumstances and situation where you are, make the best of it, and start looking towards the future. And I always knew, even while doing my using, that I'm not going to be here forever. And to know that I knew one day I was going to come out of this. And I didn't know exactly what it was going to look like, but I knew I wasn't going to be here forever. And some folks are there, they don't know that. There's folks got life in 20 and got all kind of long, extensive sentences and may never get out. But I learned that before I could get out physically, I had to get out mentally. And the biggest issue today is that no matter how long that guys have been sentenced, that when they free their minds, they free themselves from the drama and all of the situations that are in there, and they're more productive towards the system. While I was incarcerated, some of the lessons learned is that we as a society, I believe, have a lot of work to do. I think it's one of the worst situations that a person could be put in, but I do believe that there are that some folk have to be there, and it is important that we keep them there. But I also realize that for me in learning, that there's a lot of young folks that we've incarcerated that needed more than incarceration. That there are people that are suffering from mental health disorder. There are people that are suffering from broken lives and that made bad decisions one time, and their life is over. In the wrong place, their life is over. In regards to society. And probably the worst thing that I could see is to see young kids that were so young and they're facing 20, 30, 40 years and have no idea of what the beauty that life has. It was hard, really just heartbreaking. And I found myself spending a lot of time mentoring young men, which I do now, and to write and to communicate and going into the prisons to try to encourage them to not give up hope. Because just when you think it is hopeless, hope shows up and laws change and policies change and things happen, and you may have a time change you on the inside, and your situation, I found, changes. My first day of release, my wife came and picked me up, and it was trying to reestablish. But I did understand one thing, that I wasn't going to come out trying to be this big, father. I just wanted to be a friend and begin to try to establish relationship. I didn't want to come out trying to take over everything, to allow the relationship to just develop itself. Learning how to, because my children were young, so they didn't even remember that, but I have an 8 and a 9-year-old now. But some of the things I often share, that the 4 seasons of a man's life, we don't come out trying to catch up, especially the guys that have done a lot of time. Don't try to catch up. Find out where your season is and get there and flourish and do the best you can and know what needs to be done where you are. And that's what I did. I knew that the first thing I had to do was try to establish employment. I needed to take care of my legal responsibility. I needed to get that behind me. And I needed to make sure that I could then begin to bring in something that could help pulling my family back together. Being released, I was fortunate enough to have a people that was a church that when I was released, they really opened up arms for me. And I was just shocked to see that people were so excited about me coming back into the community. It makes a big difference when you see that. Even with myself, I found that I was placing too many expectations. We sit around and think and want to think that I can do this and I can do this, but that's not what always life brings. You have to really look at life and be fair to yourself. Don't place high expectations on yourself, but take life one day at a time and plan and prepare and give yourself a chance to know, guess what, somewhere in this plan, I'm going to not make it all the way like I want to, and be willing to pick it up and keep it moving. And that's the biggest thing. Some of the unexpected challenges that I've experienced, and to the day I still deal with it, is that having to carry the stigma of even being a felon. It is heartening for me. It's disheartening, should I say. But it is where I am and what I am. Not a felon, but it's what has happened in my past life. As much as I've done to correct it, it's still there. I've applied for jobs and different things that probably had not even decided that drugs would be the issue, may not even be having this conversation with you. But I do believe out of all of it that the God that I love has given me an opportunity to do what I could have never done without the experience that brought me here. So I've learned that, in this life, there's no shame and there's no condemnation. Find where you belong. Stop looking at what I could have had and look at what I do have. And that's what's made me, I believe, understand and to be able to do what I've done in such a short period of time by seeing what's working for me and not what's not working for me. I just kept showing up. I knew where I needed to be. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew the promises that I had made to God, that if I was to come out of this situation, that I would give back to help those that were incarcerated. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I had begun to write this proposal prior to being released, because I was at a facility I was a part of a class that allowed us to do some things business-wise. And I began to write this business plan. I began to write this nonprofit. I began to create a component that was built around a reentry service, and I was doing a lot of research. And it ends up bringing you to a place that after all of that had taken place, I was able to get out and plug in and with the people, and I was fine. I found out I just wanted to know what was going on, and I just kept showing up. And that's what I found. If you just keep showing up, and I found out one thing about this, people that are involved in this, they don't turn you away because they need help. We haven't figured this out yet. And I understand every component of the research, and I understand everything about risk, need, responsive, everything that I understand. I've studied and researched it in regards to the behaviors, antisocial personality disorder, all of that stuff that comes into it and that we develop while we're there. While I come out on one deal with you, it's an antisocial personality disorder. We don't trust. I don't have a trust relationship. Didn't have when going in there. We don't really trust anyway. And better than deal with you, just kind of get away from me. So I think the biggest thing and the greatest thing is that over this time period, I just kept showing up, and I got the mentors around me. I got the right people. I didn't, exclude or alienate myself. And people just started to embrace me as a person that we didn't care about your past, we care about your presence. I was the one concerned about my past. People were concerned about my presence. They were concerned about what I was bringing and my commitment and my dedication. And I think when I got psychologically straight from always wondering about the back instead of the front, I become more productive. I worked as a program coordinator for an organization. Then after that, going in and working with an organization to implement the Second Chance Adult Recidivism Grant out of Washington, D.C. as the program director in Columbus. It was a statewide grant, so I was to set up Columbus and Atlanta with a team of people hired and staffed. Then to go from there to be where you all are here with us today at an organization here which the Department of Labor has funded us through Metro to provide services for at-risk youth in the Clayton County area. Man, many days go by and I pinch myself because, and one thing that I do is I stay humble because this has not been easy. And I know what happens when I put me in it. It gets difficult. So I've been very humble, extremely blessed. I've had challenges along the way, and I do still every day. There's ups, there's downs, but I stay in the process, and I stay humble, and I treat people the way that I want to be treated, and it just seems to work out. I think the biggest issue that America and that this country suffers from right now is that they don't think people recover. And one thing that I've learned, that people do recover and they come back and become an asset and not a liability. And I think the more that we as a community and as a community at large look at people and see them where they could be, instead of always looking at where they are right now and condemning them, we can do better to help them. And I think that's what God does for us. Because if he would have looked at me where I was, then I wouldn't be here. But he saw me where I couldn't see myself. And it was because of that he gave me what he gave me, because he saw me here today. And I thank him for that. And I think I need to have that same character and disposition. I need to see you in a different place and see what you need and find out and ask you what you need to get to where you really want to be. And I think when we start doing that, this world will change, where we stop seeing people where they are, but where they could be. Well, I think that one of the biggest challenges that, folks that like us that go through this is, realizing that it is a process and you're in it now. And to get through the process is to stay in the process, to not give up, to keep hoping, keep dreaming, keep reaching for what we call recovery. Because at the end of the day, we all recover. And you'll define what recovery looks like to you. No one else can define it. No one else can tell you what it is but you. And I just encourage anyone that's watching this, don't give up. It is a challenge. There's good days, there's bad days, but stay in the process.